asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityurma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Om. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om. Peace, peace, peace. So in the first session, we saw the divinity within. When Swami Vivekananda says the goal of human life is to manifest the divinity already present within us, that is religion. The goal of religion, goal of human life is that. But what is meant by the divinity within? And we saw the two aspects of enlightenment. That's where we stopped. The paradigm shift, that I am not what I thought earlier, what I was, this body, mind, this little person. This body, mind, this little person is there, but my depth reality is much vaster than that. I am not the body, I am not the mind. There is the mind and the body, but I am the witness consciousness which illumines this mind and body, and that witness consciousness not subject to birth or death. It's not subject to the vagaries of the mind, the ups and downs of the mind. All problems are out there in the world, in the body, or even in the mind. But I am this refreshingly cool and calm and ever peaceful inner witness, serenely detached from everything in the universe. In one place, Hari Maharaj, Swami Turiyanandaji, disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, in his old age he suffered a lot from many ailments in Benares, in our home of service there. So one day somebody asked him, Maharaj, khub kashto hoche, suffering a lot, is a lot of pain. And then Maharaj said, no. Sri Ramakrishna, by the grace of Sri Ramakrishna, everything is ice cold within. It doesn't work quite well unless you know the heat of Benares, Thakurer kripaye bhetorta borof kore diyeche. It's like a mass of ice inside, absolutely cool and peaceful. That's very nice. But if that's what it means, that you are this ever peaceful, like a Himalayan peak, shining forth on a troubled world, but you are perfectly at peace, all very nice, but it doesn't exist. Such a thing isn't there. We'll see why not. What is the problem with all of this? And what is the deeper implication? We also saw that it leads to duality. Earlier the duality was, I am there and here is the world, separate world. I am separate, world is separate, God is separate. This is dualism, Dvaita. And now I see that, even the body is not I, the mind is not I am the witness consciousness, everything else is separate. This is duality. It's not Advaita, it's not non-duality. So what is the problem with all of this, and why should we look for anything different, something deeper? Well, the problem started about 2,500 years ago with one gentleman called the Buddha. He said that, my dear Hindus, he didn't use the word, there's so many philosophers who were teaching at that, so many teachers. Anatma. Atma does not exist. There is no such thing as a separate, independent soul, Atma, which you Hindus, we are now using the term Hindus, it was like a general term at that time. You all seem to be teaching, propounding. There is no such thing. And he demonstrated logically the untenability of a separate Atman. Not only that, not only such a thing is not there, it would not even help if it was there. And he showed the whole of samsara, transmigration, memory, everything becomes possible even without the Atman. In fact, the presence of the Atman does not make much of a difference. And there were many reasons given for this. The Buddhists who came after, the masters who came after the Buddha, they investigated this and they came up with extraordinary, very tight logical arguments to demonstrate, to prove that there is no such thing as separate, independent, eternal soul, sort of floating over everything else. like a driver within the car. Body and mind is the instrument. Like we were talking like that. Swami Vivekananda also points that out in his practical Vedanta lectures. There ensued a huge debate between the Buddhists and the non-Buddhist schools. On one side, the Buddhist schools and the Hindu schools, Nayayikas, Vaisheshikas, Sankhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamsa, the Kashmiri Shaivas, the Jainas, all of whom talked about some kind of independent, separate reality, higher, the self within. And the Buddhists said no. The Buddhists denied the immortal soul, Atma, so beloved to the other teachers. They denied, and as a consequence of that, they denied the existence of God also. Because, for example, in Nyaya philosophy, God is just another variety of Atma. Atma is of two kinds, self is of two kinds. All of us, each of us, we have an independent self, in body, mind, Atma. And there's one Atma who is separate from all of this and the controller of everything, Paramatma, Ishvara, God. And the Buddhists denied this in toto. There is no such thing as a separate Atma, there is no such thing as a separate God of the universe. Now what happened was, it led to a 1,000-year fight. 1,000 years of intensive debate. The Buddhists trying to disprove, and the Hindus and various other schools trying to prove the existence of Atma. The benefit of that was the development, the flowering of Indian philosophy. I would say Indian philosophy has had two golden ages, two wonderful periods of burst of creativity and development. One was the nearly 1,000 years of debate with the Buddhists. From around, I would say, 200 or 300 years after the Buddha, the flowering of Buddhist philosophy took place, to about 800, 900 AD, where it began to taper off. Nearly 1,000 years. And the second time when it developed, Indian philosophy developed, was a few hundred years after the disappearance of Buddhism. Advaita Vedanta sort of reigned supreme, and then the other Vedanta schools rose. Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, they were already there, but philosophically they became more sophisticated and mounted several attacks on Advaita Vedanta, leading to an internal fight between different schools of Vedanta. Again, a burst of creativity and tremendous development in Indian philosophy. In metaphysics, in epistemology, in language, it concluded with the development of the most sophisticated kind of logical language, Navya Nyaya. Swami Vivekananda says, the most sophisticated, intricate, precise form of logic the world has ever known. Until, I would say, the beginning of mathematical logic in the 19th century. Until that time, beginning of symbolic logic. Until that time, the most sophisticated form of logic was Navya Nyaya logic of, Mithila and then Nadia, Navadvip. So all that happened. One of the courses that I was privileged to do in the philosophy department at Harvard was taught by Professor Parimal Patil there. It's classical Indian Buddhism, 1,000 years of Buddhist philosophy in Sanskrit. So in a few months you compress it. So that's why Harvard is Harvard. You're expected to read all these ancient obscure texts translated, written maybe 1,500, 2,000 years ago, translated into almost incomprehensible English. And all of that, 1,000 years of work, very subtle work, in a matter of a few weeks. You're supposed to read it all and understand it. But it gave a very good bird's eye view, a good grasp of the entire, what you might call a literature study of the period of this tremendous clash. And the Hindu side, trying to prove that Atma existed, led to the great Nayayikas like Udayanacharya, whose masterful works, Atma Tattva Viveka, trying to prove the existence of Atma against the Buddhist attacks. Even now it is taught in graduate level courses in India, in Sanskrit and in philosophy. And then Nyaya Kusumanjali, 9 or 10 proofs of the existence of God, again directed against the Buddhist critic, that God exists, trying to prove the existence of God. So whether they manage to prove the existence of God or manage to prove existence of separate Atma or not is still, it's open. The jury is still out. If you ask the Hindus, yes, Atma and God exists. If you ask the Buddhists, no, we won the debate. There's no Atma, no God. Another name which must be mentioned is Kumarila Bhatta, to his master works, Shloka Vartika and Tantra Vartika, which contain repudiations of various schools of Buddhists who tried to criticize or critique the concept of Atma. The problem is, how can you demonstrate that there is a separate Atma? Where is this Atma? All that we experience is a stream of changes called the body, and if you look within, you will see a stream of changes called the mind. So the Buddhists based their critique on this. The great logician who lived some 500, 600 years before Shankaracharya, Nagarjuna, his book, it's an entire book of criticism of concepts like this. Motion, causality, self, even Buddhist concepts of the four noble truths of the Buddha, of Nirvana, all of them are critiqued with razor-sharp logic. Even till today, philosophers and logicians, they find it fascinating, Nagarjuna's logic. And that was further developed by a great master called Chandrakirti, who lived in the great Nalanda University, who lived around 1500 years ago. One of his famous works is the sevenfold reasoning. He gives the example of a chariot. Same example, chariot used by Yama to teach Nachiketa about self. Atmanam ratinam vidhi. Atma is the passenger. The body is the chariot. The senses are the horses. The mind is the bridle which you hold the horses with. And the charioteer, the driver, is the intellect. And the goal is enlightenment. So you are like the Atma is like the passenger sitting on the chariot going to the goal of self-realization. But a beautiful idea. And the same chariot was taken up by Chandrakirti. Interestingly, Chandrakirti's chariot does not have a passenger. So there is no Atma there. To show that this concept of an Atma, separate existence of other than body-mind, it's null and void, it's empty, shunya. So I had the opportunity of doing another course by a wonderful professor, Professor Garfield, J. Garfield. He taught Indo-Tibetan Madhyamaka, the philosophy of Nagarjuna Chandrakirti, exported to Tibet and further developed by Tibetan masters. To some extent we read Vedanta, to some extent we read Nyaya, even some of the Buddhist masters. But we as Hindus, as students of Indian philosophy, often we are ignorant of the further developments which took place in Tibet. For a period of more than 1,000 years, the lamas sitting on their icy vastness in the mountainous plateau of Tibet, they developed it to a very intricate and subtle level. So we are not even familiar with terms like Tsongkhapa, Mifam and others. So this professor taught that to us. I remember the first day in the class when I went in there, the professor said, "Swami, keep your Vedanta outside the door." He knew I was going to mix it up with Tibetan Buddhism and make a mess of it. So he was right. You should learn something separately on its own merits and then compare. But interesting, outside the campus, one day I was going back into from the Harvard yard, and I saw this Lama coming on the other side. And he smiled at me, I smiled at him, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I am studying your philosophy." And I told him about the professor. He didn't quite approve of the syllabus. He told me some other books to read. And then he said, "But you are a Vedanta monk." I said, "Yes." Oh, a big broad smile, I still remember. "Oh, it is all the same." He said, "How is it all the same?" He said, "Look, there is those 5 verses on wisdom written by your Shankaracharya." I said, "Manisha Panchakam." "Yes." He said, "I teach Tibetan Buddhism with the help of those 5 verses. And later I found out he was a very eminent teacher. He was the Tibetan Buddhist chaplain for Harvard University, Lama Migmar. All right, so what I did was, there's a point to this story. What I did was, at the end of the course, I decided that I am going to counterattack Buddhism from an Advaitic perspective and show how actually Advaita offers a solution for this 1,000-year debate. And I named the essay Chandrakirti's Chariot. And I wrote it, refuting it point by point, the Chandrakirti's attack, and submitted it. And the Professor Garfield, immediately returned it and said, "What do you think this is? Is it a Vedanta temple talk? This is a Harvard University philosophy paper. You have to substantiate every statement with rigorous logic. This won't do." So he put lots of corrections, suggestions. I rewrote the whole thing in a frenzy and sent it back to him, and he sent it back to me again. He said, again rejected. And the third time I did it, and he accepted it, and he said it's a solid defense of Advaita Vedanta. And he said it's, of that level which can be published in a peer-reviewed journal. And that's what he expected from all the submissions in his course. Okay, so that's the background. This 1,000-year debate. They're saying, where is this other thing called the self, which has to be proved? Notice where we were. The consciousness, and separate from the entirety of the mind, body, world. Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham. Now the question arises, what is the relationship between consciousness and the objects? You are awareness. Good. Fine. We have come to that. And you are separate from body, mind, object, universe. But you, the consciousness, and all of these things you are separate from, what is the relationship between them? Relationship means, are they one and the same? Are they different actually? Is one coming from the other coming from this one? What is the relationship between them? In Indian philosophy, there are many answers to this question. I'll quickly take you through 5 answers. Consciousness and object. You are awareness, and what you are aware of. What is the relationship? At this point, someone might ask, Swami, didn't in the morning, didn't we make it clear? I am not the body, I am not the mind, body is changing, I am unchanging, body is an object, I am the subject, body is not conscious, I am conscious of the body, so on. So the body, I cannot be the body must be, so I must be something separate from the body. So we made it clear, they are separate. One sadhu in the Himalayas, very nicely, when he's teaching this, he put it so nicely. I'll tell you in Hindi and then explain the point. He said, महात्मा जी ये तो सच है कि दृष्टा दृश्य से अलग है, लेकिन ये आपने कभी सोचा क्या दृश्य दृष्टा से अलग है? It is true that you the witness, you the seer, you the experiencer, you must be separate. I must be separate from the seen. The seer must be separate from the seen. Correct. But have you ever thought of this? That which is seen, drishya, object, is it separate from the seer? Is it separate from the subject? You might say, that doesn't make much sense. If one thing is separate from the other must be separate from the first one. If the paper is separate from the desk, then the desk must be separate from the paper. You should be able to see them separately. They are separate. But then that's not always the case. Look at this lectern. There is wood and there's the lectern. The wood is not literally the lectern. The wood is separate from the lectern in the sense before the lectern was made, there was the wood. It was a log. Before that, it was a tree. After the lectern is broken or something, it will still be wood. So the wood continues. The wood was there before the lectern, during the lectern. Now it's there. It's wood. And then afterwards, also it will be there. But the lectern doesn't, this podium, this lectern, it does not exist apart from the wood. Wood exists apart from the lectern. There's water and wave. So the water and the wave, the water is definitely not the wave. It's separate from the wave in the sense that it can be water in a glass of water. It can be water in the water vapor in the sky. It can be water in a river. It doesn't have to be water in the ocean and the wave. but the wave is never separate from the water. You see, whenever the wave exists, it exists as the water, as nothing else than the water. Take a more subtle example. In our dreams, we see everything in the dream. The mind itself imagines everything in the dream. So everything in the dream is mind. The contents, the mind itself can exist without the dream. When you wake up, you still have a mind, but the dream is not there. But the dream cannot exist without the dreamer's mind. It is you who are imagining it. If you stop imagining it, the dream will disappear. You continue to exist. The dreamer continues to exist, just no longer dreaming. दृष्टा दृश्य से अलग है, लेकिन दृश्य क्या दृष्टा से अलग है? It is like, to see them separate, it's like somebody has showed you an array of ornaments and has told you, look, here are necklaces, here are bracelets, here are tiaras, and there is something called gold, which is the reality. Now if I say, okay, so necklaces, bracelets, tiaras, and gold, let me look for gold. And you look at, throw away the ornaments, where are you going in search of reality, gold? You'll never find it. Somebody shows you an array of pottery and says, here is pottery, but the reality is clay. And say, okay, throw the pots away, I'm going to look for the reality called clay. You'll never find it, because it's right there. That which you see, the reality is separate from that, but those things are not separate from the reality. You can find the reality there and there itself. Swami Vivekananda says powerfully, he who runs away to meditate and die in a Himalayan cave has missed the way. He who plunges into the vanities of life has missed the way. But then what is the way? You either run away from everything in life, become a monk, stay and meditate in the mountains and attain enlightenment, if that is missing the way, or then you plunge into life, do whatever everybody else is doing, that's also missing the way. Then these are the only two options. He says, no, the way is to divinize life itself, is to deify life itself. It's to see God in everything around you, in the people around you, in the actions around you, in life itself. Everywhere there is God. That is the way. And the divinity within everything. So this one divinity pervading everything, that is what Advaita wants to say. Not that there is a separate divinity and a separate universe. This relationship between consciousness and the object. Let me give you 5 quick approaches which we find in Indian philosophy. 5, just very big. I know there are masters of Indian philosophy here, some of the leading teachers in the world. So this is very crude. This is a very bird's eye, sweeping view. One is consciousness and matter. One is that consciousness originates from matter. The subject originates from the object. Who says this? It is the materialist. From matter, from a living body, from a living brain, somehow consciousness is born. So reality is matter. Reality is time, space, energy, matter, and then organic matter, then living bodies, then the nervous systems and brains, and then only consciousness comes. It's a byproduct. So that is reductionist science. That is the ancient Charvakas. They will say consciousness is produced. They give an example. Pan. Now only those who have from India and have eaten pan in the traditional way, they will understand what I mean. Pan and all the ingredients, there's nothing stark red in them. But when you chew it, your tongue and your lips become red. So he says there is nothing called consciousness in matter. The Charvakas say. But when it's mixed in the unique way in the living body, consciousness originates somehow, like the color red. And although our science has advanced enormously, in principle, from a philosophical perspective, not 1 inch more. I have had exactly this statement told to me by a philosopher and scientist in City University, New York. He said, Swami, and there was a debate about consciousness. He said, Swami, I am convinced that consciousness is the product of a living brain. How? He says, look, how, we don't know yet. But give us 30, 40 years. This is called promissory materialism. I promise to give you the solution in 30, 40 years. And it's a serious answer, because his example he gave was, Look, 100 years back, people said we will never understand the mystery of life. What is life? We don't know. It is something spiritual. But now, we understand what is life down to the molecular level. Similarly, right now we can't actually explain how little electrical activity in the brain is producing consciousness. How? But I'm sure it is. Clearly there is a correlation. There is also, he says, there is a product, cause and effect relationship, which I want to show. But we can't show it. So just like life we can demonstrate it is made of molecular processes, similarly consciousness is also made of processes in the neurons, but we will show it will take 40, 50, 100 years. Promissory materialism. So that's one. Why that is wrong, I will tell you later when we get into Vedanta itself, that in principle it's wrong. So there's David Chalmers, who is a professor of philosophy, mind, brain, and consciousness in NYU. And he calls it the hard problem of consciousness, that you cannot generate a subjective experience from purely objective processes. That's the hard problem. But why exactly? And Vedanta gives us a very clear reason why. Anyway, so that's one. Consciousness is a product of matter. The opposite, there's a second view. Matter is a product of consciousness. Who says this? All the theistic religions of the world, if you think of it, what is the common idea of God in all the theistic religions of the world, the God-believing religions in the world? What do Christians and Jews and Muslims and Vaishnavas and Shaktas and Shaivas, what do they believe about God? That God is a conscious being. If you ask, is your God conscious or unconscious? Of course God is conscious. God is an intelligent, conscious being. And so conscious being is the creator of the universe? Yes. So matter, object, is created by consciousness. How? Again, that's a whole question. But that is the second view. We're talking about the views of consciousness and matter, subject and object. Third view, neither is created by the other. They are fundamental, eternal realities. They exist parallelly and interact with each other. Who says this? 5,000 years ago, the oldest philosopher known to humanity, Kapila, Sankhya, the founder of the Sankhya system, he said this: ultimately, you can resolve everything into consciousness and nature. Prakriti, Purusha. Purusha means consciousness, and Prakriti means the rest of it, nature. Basically, that's the conclusion we arrived at in the morning. Consciousness and everything else. And they interact. 5,000 years ago, and here, 21st century, in New York, same David Chalmers, he is propounding a theory called panpsychism. It's not a new theory, it's been there for a long time, but now a fresh new life has come into it, which is saying that we cannot reduce consciousness to matter, we cannot reduce consciousness to the brain, so consciousness must be a fundamental reality. There's a fundamental reality called consciousness, and there are other fundamental realities called time, space, matter, energy, and they interact and they exist. And consciousness is everywhere, ubiquitous consciousness. I was thinking exactly the same thing that Sankhya philosophers have been saying for 5,000 years. Literally. I remember I had this conversation with Deepak Chopra. You've heard of Deepak Chopra? Yeah. So he said in the green room before the conversation, before the dialogue, he said, Swamiji, they are taking our theories and not giving credit to us. This hard problem of consciousness, the consciousness is everywhere. I said, Deepakji, it's good if they do that, because if you say today that, oh, I learned this from Vedanta or Buddhism and I'm saying this, it will be discredited. But if you say, I'm an atheist, I'm a materialist, and I cannot explain consciousness that way, that's why I must say, I am saying that consciousness must be a fundamental reality. It cannot be explained in material terms. That's much more powerful, and we should be happy. What you came at thousands of years ago, that is now being validated and coming at it from a different perspective and independently, and that's good. That's really good. So consciousness is produced, matter is produced by consciousness, then consciousness and matter are parallel realities, whether it is the ancient Sankhya or the more modern panpsychist today is saying that. The fourth view is the view of Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, the emptiness view. They say neither matter produced consciousness nor consciousness produced matter. In fact, nobody produced each other. Nothing has been produced at all. What do you mean? It's all empty. Sarvam shunyam. Now Chandrakirti uses a very interesting example. Two bales or sheaves of hay leaning against each other. Consciousness, matter. Consciousness, subject and object. It's only when you're conscious of the world. There's something out there. But only when you're conscious of the world are you aware that you are aware. The subject arises with the help of the object all the time, which shows one depends on the other, which shows neither is independently real. When there is no object, there is no subject. Swami, didn't you talk about light in the blackness of space, consciousness in deep sleep, object has gone, only consciousness exists. So the emptiness people, Chandrakirti and all will say, all that is back calculation, you know. Back calculation is you have made up your mind that consciousness exists eternally. And now when you are in trouble, in deep sleep, for example, no consciousness. In coma, it seems no consciousness. You are somehow introducing it. This is like accountant. You know, there's a funny story about different people who applied for a job, and when they were being interviewed, there was the engineer who was asked, what is 2 plus 2? So the engineer calculated and calculated and calculated. He said something between 3.9 and 4.1. And I don't remember, it's very funny. Each person giving an answer from their academic discipline. Finally, the accountant comes. What is 2 plus 2? He gets up and he closes the door and he comes and whispers, how much do you want it to be, sir? This guy can get a job in Wall Street, you know. How much do you want it to be? So you Advaitins, non-dualists, are doing exactly the same thing. You have made up your mind that you want it to be consciousness. Now, when clearly there is no consciousness, you are bringing in, smuggling in consciousness. That it is like light in darkness of space. What proof is there? There is no consciousness there. Or at least what we normally call consciousness right now. That kind of consciousness is not there. You must admit that. So, emptiness. Consciousness also empty, object also empty. Subject and object both are empty, sarvam shunyam. Then what is real? Won't say. And there is a point to that, why the Tibetan Buddhist won't say. There's a very logical point to that. And that's why the Lama said, it is ultimately the same thing. But there's something coming at it from a negative side, something coming at it from a positive side, and both ultimately pointing to the same thing. Then the fifth approach. What are the four approaches, in case you have forgotten? Matter produces consciousness, materialists. Consciousness produces matter, religious people. Then consciousness, matter parallel, Sankhyans and Patanjali Yoga and the modern panpsychist. Then both are empty, the Shunyavadi Buddhist. Then the point I'm coming to, Advaita Vedanta, which says consciousness only. What we call matter, what we call object, is an appearance in consciousness, much like a wave appears in water, much like objects in the dream appear in your dreaming mind. It's not produced. So isn't it like God producing the world? It's not produced. Nothing has actually happened. You have not actually produced a world. When it seems to be a world, it continues to be consciousness. It was God and Brahman, and now it is a miserable world, and one day it will be all right. Gaudapada condemns this view. Pragutpatte rajam sarvam. Tenaso kripana smritaha. He says, before the origination of the universe, everything was perfect. Not the one existence absolute. Now it has not there. Now it has universe has become. We have come and we have to find our way back to Brahman, and it will happen someday or the other. He says, fools. You will never attain to realization in this way. That same Brahman continues to exist right now without any change at all. And you are that Brahman. So consciousness is the reality in which matter appears. So everything that appears right now, whatever you are experiencing as a world, is nothing other than consciousness. It is not that everything is consciousness. It is nothing other than consciousness. Consciousness alone is, and here I'm using consciousness in the sense of pure consciousness, Sat Chit. That alone is, Brahman alone is the world, and it appears as the world. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. This is the conclusion of Advaita Vedanta. Not what it seemed in the morning. World and I the consciousness. World, body, mind, and I am consciousness. Not like that. Consciousness in which mind appears, body appears, world appears, waking, dreaming, deep sleep appear and disappear, one consciousness alone. How do you do this? Again, we'll dive into a quick survey of various schools of Indian philosophy coming to this conclusion. See, I found this you can find in many ways. It can be done in many ways. Let me just give you one thing which I found quite impressive. The present Shankaracharya of Puri, Nishchalananda Saraswati ji, in one of his talks, in one sentence he said something, how from the world you go to pure consciousness, just by analysis. And that happens in 7 stages. Just a sentence, a fragment of a sentence. Now, to explain the fragment of a sentence, you need a full talk, which is what this is, today's talk, this one. What did he say? We're going to walk through it. What are we going to achieve? We start with this world as you see it in common sense. Here I am, here is this world. And right here, we will end up with consciousness only. With this world, with eyes open, only consciousness is the reality. We'll come to understand this. And this happens in 7 stages. What are the 7 stages? Very quickly, let me just go through what he said. First, you start with Jagat, world. What world? As you explain, as you see it right now. People and, space and buildings and chairs and tables and body, mind, all of this is world. Next, stage 2. You analyze this into the 5 elements. He says Jagat, second stage is, deeper you go into it, you will see Pancha Bhuta Vilasa, the play of 5 elements. The old cosmology, space, air, fire, water, earth. You might think, oh, that's all that was very old and outdated. Although it was at one time prevalent across the world, in the east and in the west, everywhere, 4 elements sometimes, 5 elements sometimes, 3 elements sometimes, but basically that. And there is a very interesting psychology behind all of that. But anyway, whether you consider that or the 100 plus elements of the periodic table, it is basically the world is made of matter, energy, time, space. And at this point, no scientist will dispute it. So basically, this is what it is. All of this is matter, energy, time, space and all. Pancha Bhuta Vilasa, the play of 5 elements. Our bodies are that. And if you read Vedanta, Sankhya, you will see even our minds are made of the subtle forms of these 5 elements. Here is where I would say ancient Indian philosophy is a step ahead of modern science. And what I mean is, forget consciousness. What is mind? There is no explanation, no place for something like mind in modern physics. People don't know. It's like a standing scandal of our modern understanding of the world. So why science, psychology is a science? Yes, but what does psychology study? When they study the mind, they are very uneasy about studying the mind, because where is the mind? I am feeling the mind. Yes, you are feeling it, but for a scientist, the last thing that a scientist can see is tiny electrical activity in your brain revealed by fMRI scans and all. That's it. Your thoughts, your emotions, your ideas, your memories, what is it? Nobody knows. Nobody knows how to fit it into a modern reductionist, matter energy scheme, paradigm of the world. So mind, even according to Indian cosmology, mind is also matter actually. There Indian thought has no problem at all. It is the subtle forms of the 5 elements which comprises the mind. Mind is also matter. The old ridiculous joke. In philosophy classes, they'll always tell you, the first joke you hear, what is matter? No, matter and mind. What is matter? Never mind. What is mind? No matter. The play of 5 elements. Then third stage, it is nothing but, all of it is nothing but Maya, Maya Vilasa. It is the play of Maya. At this point, somebody will say, oh, how do you know that? You have now introduced some old theology that is, in India, everybody knows, sab Maya hai. Jagat, the world is the play of 5 elements, or matter, time, energy, time, space, matter, energy. All of it is Maya. How do you know? But actually, I was just thinking, if you contemplate the cutting edge discoveries of modern science in the 20th century till today, you notice the all-pervasive presence of paradox everywhere. Rebecca Goldstein, who wrote a book on Gödel, in her introduction to that book, she says that, notice the greatest discoveries of 20th century in science: Einstein's relativity, theory of relativity, Heisenberg's the uncertainty principle, and Gödel's incompleteness, theorems of incompleteness theorems. But just look at the names: relativity, uncertainty, incompleteness. What's so strange about that? If you're in 19th century, if you asked scientists or mathematicians, what do you expect knowledge to be in 50 years, 100 years? They would not have said relativity. They would have said absolute truth. We are looking for absolute truth. They would not have said uncertainty. They would have said certainty. They would not have said incompleteness. In fact, there was one mathematician, David Hilbert, I think. He had a whole program, completeness of mathematics, how to complete the system of mathematics. And Gödel came and ruined that by showing incompleteness. But in principle, they did not expect knowledge to be relative and uncertain and incomplete. And so that's what she has written. The first thing that struck me is incompleteness, relativity, uncertainty. This is Maya. This is how Maya is described. If you push any system of knowledge far enough, you're going to end up with inconsistencies, you're going to end up with paradoxes. In the New School in Manhattan, I remember 3 or 4 years ago, there was a very nice conference. And the conference was on the unknown, unknowability, on what is unknowable in every discipline. So there were physicists, leading mathematicians, and there were historians and people from literature coming and talking about unknowability in their own fields. And I remember, we know what the mathematician or the physicist will say. The historian I still remember, the British gentleman who said, in history we know that the future is fixed, the past is always changing. As you know more and more about history, you keep changing your theories about what might have happened in the past. Unknowability. So Maya Vilasa, it is the appearance of Maya. Maya itself, see, it's not so strange. The philosopher Galen Strawson, his father was a very noted philosopher in Oxford University, Peter Strawson. Galen Strawson teaches, or used to teach in Texas, UT Austin. He had written this half humorous, half serious article in New York Times called The Hard Problem of Matter. He said, consciousness is not a problem, he said. We are all conscious. We are aware of consciousness directly. But after consciousness comes matter. We are aware of matter. Now, what is matter is the real question. We are all directly conscious. We are aware of ourselves. We are conscious. Then what comes in consciousness is the object. What is that object? What is matter? That is the question. And as we investigate matter more and more, it is disappearing before our very eyes. Matter is a paradox. So the Maya Vilasa, that the play of matter, it's a paradox actually at its root. So Maya Vilasa. But in Vedanta, Maya is the power of Brahman, the power of consciousness. So Maya Vilasa reduces to the play of consciousness, Chid Vilasa. It's consciousness by its unique power, which is manifesting as the elements and which is manifesting as this universe. Chid Vilasa, the play of consciousness. Now, at this level, there is a vast, vast philosophy. This is called Kashmiri Shaivism. Kashmiri Shaivism says this universe is a play of consciousness. It's the play of Shiva. So, Shiva is consciousness, the play of consciousness. So, you are consciousness. It's your play. And I love that story by Alan Watts, where he talks about what is going on here. And it's a beautiful story. It's a story for little children, but it's actually very profound for, I think, for grown-up people. Alan Watts, of course, is long before my time, but some of you might have heard about him. He was in the Bay Area. And an article about him described him as a strange combination of philosopher and pirate. So he taught a mixture of Buddhism and Vedanta. But the story, it perfectly matches Kashmiri Shaivism. So the story goes, God existed from eternity to eternity. But then existing like that for eternity, nobody else was there, God got bored and thought, I want to play. But whom will God play with? There's nobody to play with. Only God exists. So he thought about it for a very long time. How can I play? I don't have a friend. Then he hit upon an idea, because he is extraordinarily clever, he's God. So he hit upon an idea and he pretended to be not God. So God pretending to be not God. Now God can play. This is God and God pretending to be not God. Now there are two. God can play. But the problem is, God is very good at what he does. So when he pretended to be not God, he pretended so well, he forgot that he was God. And that is what is going on now. God, who's pretending to be not God, forgotten that he's God, is searching for God. This is samsara. That is a beautiful description of Kashmiri Shaivism. Shiva and Jiva are the same. Shiva manifests, plays as this universe and enters into this universe as Jiva and contracts his own powers and glories into a smaller form. In the contracted form, it's Jiva. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Pash Baddho Jeev, Pash Mukto Shiv. This idea of Pasha, of tying oneself. You become Jiva. Freed from that, you are Shiva. Kashmiri Shaivas have an extraordinary idea of bondage and liberation. So you are not bound. These Advaitins, Vedantins are wrong. You are not bound. You are free. You are Shiva. How can Shiva be bound? You are playing. You want to play at being a miserable human being. So you are playing. The day you want to be liberated, who can stop you? You are Shiva. That day, that instant, you will be liberated. You might say, but I want to be liberated. That's why I'm practicing all spiritual disciplines. It's not happening. It's taking such a long time. Then the Kashmiri Shaivas will say, now you are Shiva, you want to play at trying to be liberated. You're trying to be a sadhaka now. You're playing at being a sadhaka. The day you decided I'm liberated, you'll be liberated. Anyway, so that's their view. It's the play of consciousness. Very beautiful view. Leela, the play of consciousness. Somebody asked Sri Ramakrishna, why is there so much suffering? You find it in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. If God exists, Ishwar jodi achen, tale jagote dukkho keno. So much suffering in our lives and in the world today, whether you see the shooting of little children, war, COVID, some are natural causes, some are man-made causes. Why is there so much suffering? If God is the controller of human being and of nature, why is there suffering anywhere at all? So Sri Ramakrishna gave 3 levels of answers. The first answer was, it's a mystery, it's a paradox. Tar ichham raki buste pari. Can we understand the will of God? It is beyond our understanding. What is that? Maya vilasa. It is the Maya of the Lord. It's paradoxical. We cannot understand. The gentleman who asked the question was not satisfied by this. Again he asked, no, this is not an answer. Why is there suffering? The second answer Sri Ramakrishna gave was, this is the Leela of God, the play of God. What can we do? It is the play of God. Chid vilasa, the play of consciousness. Second answer. Same question, why is there suffering? That also the gentleman became furious. He said, in Bengali, he said, Tar to Leela Ramra Mori. It's the play of God, but it's killing us. It's veritably death for us. We suffer terribly. What kind of play is this? Would you tolerate this answer from anyone in the world? Say, for example, the neighboring kid, he plays ball and he hits a ball and smashes your light, outside your door, and you catch hold of the little kid and said, why did you do it? And he says, it is my Leela. Will you be impressed or you will not be impressed? Yeah. So why would you be impressed with God? This whole universe is my Leela, play of consciousness. And then Sri Ramakrishna gave the third answer, to which there is no comeback, which is actually the Advaitic answer. So it is God's Leela. What kind of answer is that? It is death for us. It's death for us, just for me. And Sri Ramakrishna says, and who are you? Tumi ke hai? Do you know who you are? You don't know actually. I am suffering, but who am I? That I don't know. And that is the Advaitic. He is pointing towards the Advaitic answer. There is no answer to that. So that we will come. But now we are at Chid Vilasa, the play of consciousness. This whole universe is a play of consciousness. But then, Advaitins being strict logicians, they will ask, can consciousness play? Playing means change. Playing also implies a kind of desire, that I want to play. So is change, desire, it might be a good metaphor, but literally does consciousness play? Does it change? There are deep philosophical problems also. Something that is subject to change will be subject to death also, subject to destruction also. Then consciousness can end. Not only that, consciousness is that which reveals everything as an object. If consciousness is playing, then it is play. Consciousness is that which reveals the play. In that case, consciousness must be separate from that play. So there are problems with this. And Kashmiri Shaivism, an extraordinary system, especially in spiritual practice. Those who are spiritual practitioners, there's so many things to learn from Kashmiri Shaivism. It's a very sophisticated, very intricate philosophy. But I must say, from an Advaitic perspective, and from the perspective of the other older philosophies of India, whether Buddhistic, Advaitic, you'll notice they really haven't engaged with Kashmiri Shaivism. Where is the vast literature? The great Abhinavagupta and others, they engage with every system of philosophy. But those systems of philosophy, they mention it in passing and they refute it and go ahead, because there are, I will not go into it, but there are deep fundamental flaws at the very conception, at the very root. It is maybe more poetry than philosophy at some level. I know there are those who would be aghast at, I'm thinking of certain philosophers. Anyway, but can consciousness play? No, consciousness does not change. To actually, literally, if you mean physically actually play, I mean physically the word doesn't apply to consciousness anyway. So play is not possible. What happens is, what exactly happens in consciousness? Things appear in consciousness. Consciousness experiences. The very nature of consciousness is to experience appearances. So the universe appears in consciousness. That appearance theory is called vivarta, chid vivarta. It's not chid vilasa, not the play of consciousness, but an appearance of consciousness. So everything appears because of consciousness. The very nature of consciousness. What do you mean appearance of consciousness? One Swami explained it very nicely. He said, the nature of the eye is to see, and the nature of space is to remain unseen. And that's a Nyaya theory, that space is not seen. So the eye sees and the space remains unseen, but the eye will see, and space cannot be seen. So when you look up at the space, it looks like an inverted bowl. It looks like a surface. Children might think that it's a blue inverted bowl. They don't get the feeling that it's endless space there. Why? Because the eye has a way of imagining a surface which has to be seen, and space cannot be seen. It's like that old question of irresistible force meets immovable object. What will happen? There's a story, one of my favorite authors, science fiction authors, was Isaac Asimov. Though some of you must have read. And he tells a story about his life. He said he would ask this question to any girl who is a prospect of marrying, that if you answer this question, then I will marry you. What will happen if an immovable force meets an irresistible object? What is an immovable force? That immovable object, that which cannot be moved. Irresistible force, that which can move everything. It can't be resisted. So if the two meet, what will happen? Nobody could answer. I think nobody wanted to marry him also. Then the girl whom he finally married, she answered correctly. So what was the answer? It will never happen, because if there is an immovable object, there cannot be an irresistible force. By definition, immovable object means there cannot be any force which cannot be resisted. And if there is an irresistible force, there can be no object which cannot be moved. So the two can never meet. So then he had to marry her. Then. So. But here the result is paradox. Consciousness will experience, and there is nothing else other than consciousness to experience, so consciousness appears as its own object. Consciousness appears as its own object. Very much like a dream. In a dream, the mind appears as the dream world. That is called chid vivarta. Not an actual transformation of consciousness. Not that consciousness becomes the universe. Not that consciousness produces matter, energy, time, space. But it appears as matter, energy, time, space. Like a virtual world. Now, this might not be as crazy as it sounds, There are crazier ideas out there in modern physics. Brian Greene, who's a very well-known cosmologist at Columbia, he's written this book, An Elegant Universe, and the PBS documentary also was there on string theory and everything. His latest book, Until the End of Time, it is more philosophy than physics. So he has written this book, he launched it at Harvard, and there, a beautiful presentation. One of the things he mentioned was, the universe might be a product of a brain, they called it a Boltzmann brain, and like a quantum state existing for endless amounts of time, it can come together into an intelligence suddenly of immeasurable capacity and produce a universe. I mentioned it to an eminent philosopher. He was so furious, he said, yes, once you are an eminent physicist and scientist, you can say anything you like, and that will be taken seriously. Whereas philosophers, we say some of the most logical things, but because we are a philosopher, nobody cares for us. Anyway, Chid Vivarta, it appears as consciousness. The consciousness appears as the universe. But that which appears as the universe, in that case, every bit of it must be consciousness. If consciousness is appearing as the universe, then the next stage is called Chinmaya, pervaded by consciousness. So if consciousness itself, if the wood itself is coming as the table, then every bit of this must be wood. Inside, outside, top, bottom, it must be wood. If consciousness itself is appearing as the universe, then every bit of that appearance must be consciousness. So if you examine everything, everything is consciousness, Chinmaya, pervaded by consciousness. You might think this must be the last stage. No, one more stage. Chinmaya, pervaded by consciousness. Is there a pervader and pervaded relationship? Is it something like, here is a room, switch on the light will pervade the room? Is it like that? There is a universe, and switch on consciousness, consciousness pervades. Here is a room, light the incense, the fragrance of the incense will pervade the room. Is it like that? Or is it like wood and the lectern, like wave and water, like gold and ornament? Here, light and the room are distinct. One pervades the other. Room and the incense fragrance are distinct. One pervades the other. Is consciousness like that? It pervades the universe. So many people think like that. That there is the universe, solid, here, and God is pervading the universe, consciousness is pervading the universe. Something is there like light or something like that all everywhere. And here Vivekananda said that I have never taught such strange doctrine that God is everything. Mary Hale said, I understood what you have taught, that God is everything. Vivekananda said, I have never taught such a thing. I have never taught such. You said it. No, what I meant was that God alone is. The universe is not, the world is not. Everything is not, God alone is. And God alone is, everything is not. The last stage is, it's not that consciousness pervades the universe. Consciousness alone is. Yeah. The universe is an appearance. Consciousness alone is. Chin matra, consciousness alone. Not a pervading consciousness. Shankaracharya also says in one place, there is no pervaded relationship. Here also, there is no pervaded relationship. It is wood, through and through. It has a form of a lectern, name of a lectern, and the use of a lectern. Nama, rupa, vyavahara. Name, form, and use. Name, form, and transaction. But the reality is that it is made of wood only. There is only wood. Consciousness only, chinmatra. Now, 7 stages. Let me run you through the 7 stages and bring this to a conclusion. 7 stages. Start with the physical world. Jagat, stage 1. Resolve that in your understanding into matter, space, time, energy, into the 5 elements. Panchabhuta vilasa. Resolve that further. They are all produced from Maya vilasa. Of course, the Shankaracharya, when he said this, in his mind there was Taittiriya Upanishad. Tasmad vaye tasmad atmana akasha sambhuta. From this Atma appears Akasha, Vayu, Agni, sky, air, fire, water. So Maya vilasa. It is all the play of Maya. But Maya is the power of consciousness. Maya does not exist by itself. Maya is the power of consciousness. So next, stage 4, Chid vilasa, the play of consciousness. Whole of Kashmiri Shaivism will enter here. Extraordinary philosophy. But we have objection. Does consciousness actually play? Because Kashmiri Shaivis, they will say that there is a dynamic aspect to consciousness. Consciousness vibrates, spanda. Consciousness, does it actually change? Does it vibrate? Does it play? No. Things appear in consciousness, as our own experience of consciousness. So, Chid Vivarta, appearance theory. Then the 6th stage is, whatever is an appearance in consciousness must be pervaded by consciousness. Every bit of it must be consciousness. It's an appearance. So, Chinmaya, pervaded by consciousness. And the last one is Chinmatra. It's not pervader and pervaded, it is consciousness and consciousness alone. Shankaracharya, in Aparoksha Anubhuti, he says, Karye hi karanam pashyet. In the effect, notice the cause. In the lectern, notice the wood. In the clay pot, notice the clay. The clay is the cause, the pot is the effect. Oh, where is the clay? In the pot? Well, what you are touching, that's the clay. Inside it's the clay. The top is the clay. The bottom is the clay. In fact, through and through you find clay alone. So you next notice that the cause, the material cause, the substance pervades the effect through and through. What we just did, Chinmatra, consciousness alone. So it is clay through and through. In that case, there is no separate reality called pot. So there is no separate reality called pot which has been produced. So if the effect has not been produced, then how will you call clay the cause? The cause loses its causality. Karanata tato gachet. He says then the cause loses its causality. Clay cannot be called the cause of pot because clay alone exists in a clay pot. And pot is an appearance, is a form, is a name and a use. It looks like this. You call it a pot and you can put water in it. Everything will work, but it is clay and clay alone. What remains when you do this analysis? It's a clay remains, yes, but the clay remains in the example. We are not interested in pots and clay. He says the Muni alone remains. You, the sage, you remain alone. You, consciousness, you remain alone. In you, this entire universe is an appearance, not one bit different from you. You pervade this entire universe as awareness, as consciousness. There's this oneness of all existence. That right now, just as all ornaments are gold, all waves and foam and surf are water, and all pottery, clay pots are nothing but clay. Similarly, this entire universe is nothing but Brahman, Atman, consciousness, appearing as this universe. This is the answer to Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna and to the Buddha. You're right, there is no separate Atma, body, mind, Atma. No. It is the Atma alone appearing as body, mind and universe. It's Brahman alone appearing as body, mind and universe. Swami Vivekananda says, Advaita alone gives a solution to this problem. It is that not that there is a separate rope and a snake. It is the rope alone which appears as the snake. That in which our present experience we see as world, body, mind. And when we get an insight by inquiry, by samadhi, by the grace of God, remember the paths I talked about, path of devotion, path of meditation, path of inquiry, in whichever way, once we get that insight, we see it is consciousness alone which appears as everything. Only, we'll say it's consciousness alone, I alone. Brahme vedam sarvam, ahame vedam sarvam. Brahman alone is all this. I alone am all this. I means consciousness. The Jnani will say that. The devotee will say God alone is everything. Everything God has is appearing as this entire universe. So this is the oneness of all existence, which, just as a side note, if you go to the Buddhist approach, especially the Tibetan Buddhist approach, and of course there is a Chinese Buddhist approach, I have been told that's even closer to Vedanta, but I am not aware of, I have not read much about, not at all in fact. But the Tibetan Buddhist approach, it seems to be entirely negative, but it leaves you pointed at something. And there are schools, apart from the most well-known school of Tibetan Buddhism, which is the Gelug school, most powerful, influential. But there are schools like the Jonang school, the Shentong school, which openly speak about Buddha nature as the basic space of awareness. Basic space of awareness, if you translate, Chidakasha, consciousness itself. They will not directly say, because there's a reason. If you positively state something, you will attract the anger of Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna, and they will prove that it is empty. But, and it's true, it's not a positively stated entity. It is the reality of all so-called positive and negative entities. So this basic space of awareness of the Buddhists, the Mahayana Buddhists, and the pure consciousness of the Advaitins, and if you make it a little more liberal, Sri Ramakrishna's approach was liberal in the sense that all these are logical niceties. The fact is, everybody has got it right. I met one Swami, an American Swami, in our order. I asked him, how did you become a monk? He said, I grew up in Carolina, North Carolina, I think, and it was staunchly Christian, and then I noticed that every church was saying that every other church people will go to hell. We are right, and the church across the street, they're all going to go to hell. So I, as a teenager, I thought they're all wrong then. But then later I came across a book, Vedanta for the Western World, and there immediately I connected with it. It said, everybody is right. Not that every little detail is right, but in principle, everybody is right. The whole idea of the perennial philosophy, that underlying all the varied approaches in religion, in philosophy, in spirituality, there's one grand underlying truth, a perennial truth, which can be accessed by spiritual practices and which will give you what we are all looking for, ultimate fulfillment and transcendence of suffering. Atyantika dukkha nivritti paramananda praptischa. Today I pray to Thakur, Ma and Swamiji, this auspicious day, the Silver Jubilee here, the 125th anniversary of the Ramakrishna Mission, to bless all of us, that that great consummation may come in this life for all of us. May we, by the grace of God, may we realize the ultimate reality, our real nature, the real nature of this universe. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.